Welcome to the Top Order podcast. We've got two very happy people, one very disappointed person, and me here to gloat on the pain of the unhappy person, all coming up on our episode that's going to recap the World Test Championship final. We'll talk about the roller coaster of a game that was at the home of cricket, Aiden Markram's fantastic fourth innings 100, and could we get to the end of the 2020s and think South Africa is the all-format team of the decade? We'll also ask some big questions for the next cycle of the World Test Championship as well. All coming up on the Top Order podcast. Stay tuned. You're not even going to do the swish, Michael?
I didn't even connect the roadcaster. None of you guys showed up to the studio, so I just plugged myself straight into the laptop.
Just do it. Just do it a cappella.
Minimal preparation, maximum pain.
This is going to be brilliant. I am so looking forward to this. So look,
stick the boot in, boys. Go on, stick the boot in.
Well, look, we're going to come on to that because I think you're probably a little bit more down on Australia than the rest of the group, even though South Africa have put on a pretty decent and convincing performance when you kind of look at it at a high level. But we'll come into that because I don't think the game was quite as easy as that fourth innings chase and day and a half to spare, which certainly probably didn't help the hospitality. But I'm going to come to Raj first because Raj, for those of you that don't know on the pod, I think particularly Stu and Raj have played a lot of club cricket with a strong South African contingent. I think have always had a soft spot for this team. And Raj, you're really happy, aren't you? For more than one reason.
Look, I am absolutely over the moon for South Africa. You've thrown to me in a way that is somehow, up yours, Raj. South Africa have won finally. That's what I feel like you're throwing it to me as.
Not at all. Not at all.
They won. They won that game. I said, going into the game when we did our sort of round the grounds at the end of the last episode, the team that scored the most runs was going to win, and that is exactly what has happened in this Test match. But all jokes aside, South Africa won this Test match. I think that they're deserved winners. They've added an 8th consecutive match to their winning streak through the World Test, the last World Test Championship cycle. So deserved winners. We saw some absolute stallions with the ball. One stallion in particular with the bat. I thought it was even though it was short, there was some interesting cricket to be seen. I'm not a massive fan in ball dominating bat. If you all know sort of my history with this podcast, I'd much rather see 500 runs a day than 27 wickets, or what was it, 14 wickets on the second day. But yeah, I'm very, very pleased with for South Africa to have that win. Over to you, Stu. Tell us how you've been predicting this for years, and it's finally come to fruition. All that stock you had in South Africa has gone through the roof.
Well, I can't say I predicted it completely because I didn't predict them to win in our last episode. I did.
None of us did. It was 4-0 Australia or 5-0 Australia. Yeah.
I will give myself a tiny bit of credit in that I said that the way South Africa wins is this is a low-scoring game, and that's exactly kind of what we saw. Nothing was over 300. That's the way South Africa was always going to win this game, with the way that we were concerned about their batting. All of that stuff did show up. But I think we have to, as you said, Raj, South Africa have been getting closer and closer and closer over these past few years. People can say whatever they like about chokers and all of that kind of stuff, that narrative that's been building for a long time. But they were in the 2023 World Cup semi-final, 2024 T20 final, and now they've done it, World Test Championships. And look, they deserve a huge amount of credit. And it's awesome to see how much it meant to them, really, because I don't think if Australia win that game, that we're seeing Nathan Lyon in tears in the way that Keshav Maharaj was, and Pat Cummins just overwhelmed with the emotion in the way that Temba Bavuma was, and you can go down the line of all of their players. I think it meant so much more to South Africa than it would have to Australia, and that was great to see. And look, we'll get into the nitty gritty of the game. As you said, it was a roller coaster of a game, kind of short, plenty of action, up and downs for both teams. But great entertainment for the neutral fans for sure.
Let me come to Baldy, and I'll give you a little bit of insight into the Top Order podcast. We have a couple of Slack channels running, and in our sort of general general chats, memes, and gentle ribbing channel. After day 2, we asked Baldy how he's feeling, and his normal response is if Australia had been 650 for 1 after day 2, Baldy would have still said, both teams have got a bat on this. We'll have to have a look in a day's time. He actually said, "I'm feeling good." After day 2, which is really, really rare for you, Michael, to think your team's in a good position, even if you really are. How did it sort of manifest itself in your head, this sort of roller coaster of a game from an Australian perspective?
Yeah, it was in the balance for the majority of the first sort of 2.5 days. And even after day 1, where we were sent into bat, we were, pretty close to being rolled. In fact, we were rolled for 212 and had South Africa, 3 down at stumps. I still felt pretty good after day 1, even though Australia didn't get off to a good start at the top of the order. We lost 3 quick wickets. We gave opportunities to the opposition just prior to lunch with Travis Head's dismissal. Alex Carey gave the opposition an opportunity with his dismissal and dropped a catch. All of those things having taken place, I still felt pretty good because I felt like we didn't play great cricket, but we're still in front of the game. And I felt like even after day 2, Australia was still slightly in front of the game. But day 3 proved to be a very, very different set of conditions. It proved to be a very, very different batting wicket. And you have to say that as good as Stark and Hazelwood's partnership was, South Africa used the conditions to their advantage and really played the game in a different way to the way Australia batted. They batted with impetus. They looked for singles. They looked to put pressure on the opposition. And really, they made batting look pretty easy in that 4th innings, whereas Australia at no point in the game made batting look easy at all, except for that last wicket partnership between Stark and Hazelwood on the beginning of what was that day 3. So, yeah, I was feeling pretty good after a couple of days. It was a very, very, very well-balanced test match. Both sides kind of had their noses in front at different points. But South Africa, as soon as they got a sniff of the better part of the conditions, they really wrested the advantage back from Australia. And to their credit, there was no thought of any of the previous history weighing on their minds. They did the job. Markram and Bavuma in particular, consummate professionals in their chase. And look, as much as I'm going to pour misery on Australia in my analysis of the team when we get to talk about them, you have to give South Africa credit because they were incredibly professional. There were some absolute stallion-like performances, as Raj alluded to earlier in the podcast, with bat and with ball, and they thoroughly deserved the victory that, let's face it, would have meant more to South Africa. It certainly looked like that at the end of the game, and I think that the way that they played, the intent that they showed, that was manifesting itself on the field, that it looked like it meant more to them than it would have done to the Australian team.
Stu, I'm going to come to you with a question, and I know Raj just dropped off the call for a second there, so this question to Raj as well. We talked about it being a roller coaster of a game. Baldy, you just alluded to the conditions there. To give a bit of, I guess, history, long-serving Lord's groundsman Mike Hunt retired 2 or 3 years ago, and he had a different way of preparing this Lord's wicket, and that was to roll it a little bit more and not have quite as much grass on that wicket. Carl McDermott is the new groundsman, and has started to prepare this wicket in a very, very different way. Doesn't roll it quite as much, leaves a lot more grass on it. And I think you alluded to the low scores of this game. So how much was this conditions, and how much? And are you annoyed, particularly Michael? Are you annoyed at the wicket for a showpiece game, or is this just a case of we have seen probably the 2 best attacks going around in world cricket at the moment, going up against 2 batting sides with a little bit of fragility in them? Sorry, that's a really long question, but and
addressed to all of us.
Well, I like to be inclusive and bring everybody into the podcast. There you go.
I will just say it wasn't really what I was expecting after listening to you guys talk last week. You guys had expected, I know Jamie alluded to the game that Leicestershire played that was a low scoring game. We talked about that and essentially decided, oh no, like they'll make sure that it's flat and that it's got more runs in it. But look, overhead conditions that you can't predict what those are going to be, and certainly South Africa winning the toss and bowling first had a huge impact on that game. I mean, they said it themselves. I don't think that's controversial statement. I think that's they got the best of the conditions and they made wonderful use of them, as you said, because they've got a fantastic bowling attack, and so do Australia, to be fair. So yeah, I mean, I would say it's as you said, it's the conditions, but it's also brilliant bowling attacks against very fragile batting lineups. I mean, I'll throw it to Baldy in terms of whether he was annoyed about that, because I don't mind it. You guys know I don't mind when ball gets a bit of a chance against bat, because more often than not, bat does seem to dominate, particularly in the white ball format.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't mind when it's moving around or when it's spinning big. And on that, I mean, I think Nathan Lyon would have come into this game. If we'd seen more runs in this game, I think it was going to turn big. It started to do that on that final day as well, or fourth day as well. So yeah, over to you, Baldy.
Not annoyed at the state of the wicket or the conditions at all. I mean, you expect that day one of a test match should be a little bit difficult for batting in the first 45 minutes to an hour. Australia certainly found that out. South Africa, you got to give them credit in both innings with the new ball when it was carrying to the slips. They asked questions of the batters in the right areas, and you have a look at the trends for both of the Australian openers over the course of this World Test Championship. Khawaja consistently getting out, not moving his feet, fencing at the ball outside off stump, fourth or fifth stump. He was dismissed in exactly the same fashion in both innings. Marnus Labuschagne, they had a graphic up early, Dinesh Karthik, who did some brilliant analysis in this test match for the host broadcaster, was showing the average during this World Test Championship cycle for Marnus Labuschagne just outside off stump, fourth, fifth stump channel was about 9. And then his average out beyond 6 stump throughout this World Test Championship was 18. Either way, it's not a pretty picture that he was painting. And in both innings, Marnus Labuschagne was dismissed, fencing at a ball outside off stump, fifth or sixth stump channel, and was caught behind the wicket. Cameron Green at number 3, hard hands, pushing at the ball, caught in exactly the same fashion at third slip within the first 3 balls that he faced in both innings. So you can't blame the conditions for that, because you've got to put it down to South Africa executed their plans tremendously well. Australia did not show nearly enough intent to look to score early on in either innings. Even if you have a look at the way South Africa batted, they left the ball a lot short, but when they got a ball that was in an area, they could push it into the offside and take one. Australia didn't look to do that at all in the first 8 to 10 overs of that first innings. In fact, there were no changes of strike. So you can't put that down to the conditions. That's all about intent. And they did not learn their lesson from the first innings and the second innings, because all 3 batters got out in exactly the same fashion in the second innings. So that's got nothing to do with conditions. I wasn't disturbed by the conditions at all. I just thought Australia took the wrong intent into the match and just didn't learn their lessons from innings to innings.
My take on it is actually probably to agree and disagree with sort of all of your sentiments, Baldy and Stu. I actually thought that this was a poor pitch for the sort of centerpiece of the World Test Championship. I think that it looked like both teams were playing in foreign conditions, which essentially they were. But the pitch definitely played its part, and a lot of balls moving fractionally. You look at sort of day one pitches or pitches that have a little bit of juice in them. They move enough for you to play and miss. This pitch was moving just enough for you to catch an edge or to miss on the inside edge and get hit in front of middle. And, being in England, the bounce was very unforgiving for batsmen. When they played and missed, they got bowled. When they got hit on the pads, the ball wasn't going over in a lot of situations there. Interesting you mentioned stuff around technique or around those players that went out there at the top of the order. Cameron Green absolutely found out as a top order batsman. Both dismissals, hard hands, pushing at the ball, didn't look great. Marnus Labuschagne, I'm going to disagree with you on a little bit. I think that he read the pitch beautifully and he decided that if the ball was in his area, he's going to go for it, and he's got to execute better. He didn't execute as well as he should have, but that was the play, was to actually go after that ball in a sort of Sam Constance, I'm going to go Chris Gale fashion. Go after it. Go after the ball. I think that would have done extremely well, especially with the harder juke. And you saw when South Africa did that in the very, very last day, when that new ball came out, Markram went straight after it. I know he got out, but I think that was the play with the new ball early on. Stubbs as well. I think that he got exposed a little bit with his technique. He hung in for a while, but both of them, he had his bat coming down from second slip and taking middle stump both times. So the fragility of techniques was found out on this wicket, and I don't think it was a great advertisement for Test cricket. We want to see a bit of everything, but I don't think we really saw that to what I wanted to see anyway. I should have gone in the middle of you two because you guys were more positive, and we should have formed a sandwich. But that's how I feel about it. Binksy, I'll give you a chance to answer that question. How did you feel about the pitch?
Yeah, I think for me, it's the history of Lords over the last 15 years has been that it's traditionally been quite a good deck. I remember, it is going back a little while, but 9 Ashes, Australia had a chase of, I think, certainly sort of 350, 400, and I went on the final day with an Australian friend, and I was pretty worried that, the pitch was, still flat, still held together, still pretty good to bat on that fifth day. The conditions, I think, of it have changed over the last 5 years, and I think perhaps the comments that Jamie and I might have made last week were with the sort of historical lens on Lords. When you actually look at the stats, it's been a pretty low scoring ground over the last sort of 3 or 4 years. I tend to agree, Raj, that I don't think it was a great wicket, but I think when I actually look at it and look at the scorecard and look at some of the sort of technical analysis that you boys have gone into, we saw an absolute masterclass from Aiden Markram on how to bat on it, going through particularly that yesterday, the last day of the Test match. He went something ridiculous like 18 balls in a row where he scored a single. I've made that up, but he was just rotating the strike and waiting for that bad ball. And I think the other point that we've alluded to is, look, this was two of the best attacks going around. I think we all raised a little bit of an eyebrow on day one when Lungi and Gidi was picked ahead of Patterson. But he's absolutely showed why he deserved to be, and he looked a bit rusty, I think, certainly in his first spell, in the first innings, but then picking up 3 in that second innings. So I think yes, it was not a great deck, but I think we've got to just look at the fact that it was some all-time Test great bowlers on show, and if you then think about a World Test Championship final with a guy who doesn't opening the batting, and a guy who doesn't bat 3, batting 3, and a guy in Bo Webster who is relatively new on the scene, coming in at 6 and led a charmed life in that first innings. Well, I know he got 70 odd, but he could have equally been gone for a single figure score. That looks a pretty fragile Australian batting lineup as well, would be my take.
Can we just touch on a few of those stallions that Raj mentioned before, because I think they do deserve sort of special mention. I mean,
the bowlers, yeah.
I think they were, as you
Raj,
said.
Do you want to talk about some stallions?
Well, let me just run through some numbers here, because you said all-time great bowlers on show. Stark, 97 tests, 387 wickets at 20. At 27. Rabada, 71 tests, 336 wickets at 21.7. Pat Cummins.
Give me his strike rate. It's like 38 or something.
Yeah, it's insane. And Pat Cummins, 68 tests, 301 wickets at 22. Hazelwood, 73 tests, 280 wickets at 24.7. I think those four, when I was looking through last night, out of the seam bowlers still left playing, I think those four are maybe the top. I think certainly Stark, Rabada and Cummins are the top 3. I think then there's Kemar Roach maybe ahead of Hazelwood. But look, you're looking at, like, as you said, all-time greats. They're all going to finish their careers over 300. Stark's probably going to get over 400. Some of these other guys might as well, depending on how much cricket they make. You throw in Nathan Lyon, who's got 550 Test wickets to his name. And so, just fantastic. Like, it seriously was awesome bowling. And, your comment, Raj, about the way that they were moving it just enough to take the edge. I mean, I don't disagree too much about the pitch. I mean, you obviously want a pitch where you're going to be able to get the perfect cricket game, right? Is normally that the first innings, you see a bit of work in that first hour, first 2 out, first session, and then that flattens out, you build a partnership and so on, get 350, 300, 400, or 400, and then the game builds from there and progresses into the fifth day where spin starts to take it. But I mean, those bowlers were good enough to move it just enough to be taking edges, to be hitting Rabada and Cummins in particular. They were the ones that had the most success in this game. The way they go about things is by just being relentless. They're not the quickest, but they're quick enough, and they just at you every single time, and they make you play, and they make you play, and they work you over on all of your weaknesses. Sometimes I watch Cummins and think, he's sort of not doing that much. Like, he doesn't look as scary as some of the other guys. And then, you look up and he's got 6 for 28, and you go, oh, jeepers. And you look at his 300 test wickets at 22 and think, okay, this guy seriously quality bowler. So I don't know. Take someone else pick up from there.
100% agree. I don't think it's either. I don't think either that it is a coincidence that both of those bowlers were right arm around about 140 k's. That was perfect for that kind of bowler on that wicket, and they executed incredibly well. I mean, I ripped apart Cameron Green about 5 minutes ago, but he got an absolute nut in the first innings. Like, no one's really doing much more with that, but it did expose some sort of technical flaws. But they bowled well, and I think the secret to South Africa's, the secret sauce they had in that third innings, and I'll throw to Baldy shortly around the collapse they had their 7 for 45, was Lungi Ngidi being able to come on and actually continue to apply that pressure. Australia had their radars out for Rabada, going, we need to make sure that this guy doesn't cause problems here, and it is actually Ngidi coming from coming on after or before Rabada and just destroying them through the middle there. So what do you make of that, Baldy? Because they were great bowlers. I will actually extend the question to say Australia have been characterised in the recent future with batting collapses, and there were 2 here in this game as well.
Yep. You can't get away from it. Australia's key theme from a batting perspective in this World Test Championship cycle has been batting collapses, particularly at the top of the order. There's no denying that. There's no getting away from that, and there's certainly no excusing it. But you do have to give credit to South Africa for bowling in partnerships, particularly Ngidi and Rabada, but also the other guys that came on and did a serviceable job. Vian Mulder in the first innings wasn't as penetrative as I think South Africa would have hoped him to be, but he picked up a key wicket in the second innings. Marco Jansen didn't really look that threatening, but did enough to keep the Australian batters honest. And to be fair, the Australian batters never approached either of those 2 guys with enough intent, in my mind, to take the attack to them and dominate them and force South Africa to make a change, force South Africa to do something different. Questionable, a couple of tactical decisions from Bavuma maybe in the first day of how he used his bowlers, but look, when you dismiss a side for 212, you can't really be too critical of the way that the captain uses his bowlers. But I just thought that South Africa bowled tremendously well in partnerships. They built pressure on Australia. They didn't let Australia get away at any point. Okay, yes, it was easy to bat on day 3 as we saw, and it looked like Australia were pretty comfortable at that point. But other than that, I thought South Africa just applied brilliant pressure to the Australian batting lineup. And look, the question of how fragile is Australia is not going to go away. Whether you point the finger at Travis Head for getting 2 low scores when his team needed him, whether you point the finger at the top order, whether you point the finger at Bo Webster batting at number 6, whether you point the finger at Steve Smith for having to step up and get 100 for Australia and he didn't deliver, whatever angle you choose to take, there are some really heavy questions that are going to be asked of Australia as they embark upon this tour of the West Indies into the new World Test Championship cycle, because sure as shit, we have to have that figured out before England come down to Australia in the summer, because if their bowlers get a hold of that Australian batting lineup and they're in anywhere near as fragile a state, they're going to tear us a new one, and we'll be staring down the barrel of not just a moral loss in the Ashes, but a 4-0 loss in the Ashes as well.
Right.
Before we look ahead to Australia's potential downfall, which I'm sure we're all very excited to talk about. Can we talk about a couple of those other South African heroes, Markram and Bavuma?
Yeah.
I mean,
let me frame this. Can
I frame it in terms of
you frame
Markram?
it then? Okay.
Well,
I was going to frame it in terms of Markram. I've stuck to the run sheet all the way through. I was coming to it.
I'm just eager because basically I feel like
I was waiting for Baldy to finish talking. Go on, you frame it.
Okay,
I've got a perfect framing ready.
Underwhelming career for me. He's absolutely been when he came into the picture for South Africa. I feel like he was massively highly regarded. He was someone who was going to be the next big thing for South Africa. He scored 400s in his first 17 tests, 2 90s, an 80. 2 of those hundreds were against Australia. Never really kicked on after that. 300s from his next 65 innings before this one. Average of 35. Am I the only one that feels like I did not see this coming for him? And boy, what an absolutely great time to deliver when it really mattered, because he hit that partnership between him and Bavuma. Absolutely sealed this game for South Africa, because we saw after that how nervous that middle order was and how kind of scary things got for them, even when 1 or 2 wickets started to fall on that fourth day. But go on then, Binksy. You the reason I wanted to ask is because you don't really get the chance to talk otherwise. You're just leading. So why don't you tell us what you think about Aiden Markram?
Well, so what I think about Aiden Markram and the way that I would have framed this that slightly differently is at the end of the game, they went and interviewed a number of the South African players, and I think Kesav Maharaj was in tears. Temba Bavuma was clearly emotional. Unfortunately, you had Kevin Peterson going around hugging people and crying as well. Graham Smith was there and interviewing some players as well, and you could see how much it meant to him as a guy that obviously captained the side for a long, long time. Markram was the sort of least emotional of them, and actually started then talking about how this needs to be keeping Test cricket number 1 in South Africa, putting it into that shop window. And the way I was going to frame it is I'd seen just after the game had sort of finished, I'd seen a documentary when I was flying back from a work trip with Alex Ferguson. And when they won each Premier League title, he celebrated for literally 30 seconds. And then he was on to, how do we continue this legacy? And I think that's the rhetoric that you got from Markram. That was the way that he batted in this game, I think, was setting up what's next for this South African team. And leading back to the question, I think that we've got in the run sheet, which is, could this now be an all-format team of the decade if they can bring some of the right young players in to augment some of the guys that they've got in this team? And Kagiso Rabada can lead this attack for another 4 or 5 years, can't he? Marco Jansen, relatively young man. They've got some Tristan Stubbs coming onto the scene. They've got this sort of ability, I think, really to have a good nudge if they can play enough Test cricket. And I think that's my biggest thing, that they thoroughly deserve to win this final against what was, leading into this one, let's be honest, on paper and everything over the last 3 years, the best team in the world, Australia. They're not now, and rightly so. But I think we've now got to get this World Test Championship. We've got to take this and actually now turn this into something that means as much to South Africa, something that means as much to the other nations playing in it as it meant to South Africa. Because as Baldy said, Australia wouldn't have cared as much about winning this. And how can you say that against what should be the pinnacle of your sport? So that's my take. He was the Iceman. It was a sensational innings.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit here. I don't think the impact of Aiden Markram's heroics, will be seen in the sort of his stat line. It's about how he sort of brings his team together. They've always, if you look back through their history, sort of rallied behind a stoic figure, and he is the stoic figure of this generation, and he's got some real artillery around him, all the way through. And you're right, and we could look back in 5-6 years time and go, South Africa really were across all three formats the most dominant team. A long way to go, 5-6 years to go, or 5 years to go with that. But I don't think it's necessarily going to be shown in his stat line, where we're going to see it in terms of he was in a team that ended a 27-year drought in terms of ICC trophies, getting across that final line. I remember, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but looking at that graphic of how many times South Africa had fallen short and how many semi-finals they'd got to, how many quarterfinals, and finally getting over the line. I think that's very, very impactful, and that's the headline that will be on his bio at the end of his career.
Fellas, so
over to you, Binksy, to frame up.
Yeah. So look, I think final thoughts really for this. Baldy, you've alluded to it a little bit. Where to next for Australia, I think, and then maybe where to next for South Africa, boys, before we wrap the pod. So Baldy, you go first.
Yeah. Australia have got a lot of questions to answer, and they're the same questions that we had prior to the game, and that was what's going to happen with one of their opening spots and what's going to happen at number 3. And we haven't answered that question in this World Test Championship final. I don't think we really expected to land on an answer that we could take forward to this next World Test Championship cycle, but I think what is the most concerning thing for Australia is that their batting lineup, none of it looks like it's working at the moment. And I actually think, even though there's been some criticism of Bo Webster a little bit, not on this pod, but in certain circles, in terms of, should he be in the Australian team going forward if Cameron Smith is fit and healthy? He's actually the one thing that I think has really worked for Australia over the last 6 or 8 months. Going into this game, he averaged 50 with the bat. He scored a very important 72, admittedly, got a couple of chances, but that can happen in cricket in the first innings. I think actually he's been one of the bright spots. I don't think Australia have got many strengths going forward that they can really rely on to be things that are locked down for them for the next 2 or 3 years. If you have a look at Smith's age, he's 35. What's he going to be able to continue to deliver Australia on a consistent basis? Usman Khawaja has had a public backing from the Australian hierarchy, which, if you follow English football or American football or American basketball, means he's almost certainly going to be sacked within the next 3 weeks. We've got the Sam Constas question. When's he going to come back into the Australian side? What kind of rope will the Australian selectors give him when they eventually give him another go? What's going to happen with Marnus? Various levels of praise in this Test match. He's got 240 runs in his last 10 professional games at an average of 20. So his returns in this game, 17 and 22, are about average for him at this point in his career. So what's he going to be able to give Australia moving forward? I'm not trying to paint unnecessarily bleak the sky is falling picture, but there are lots of questions for this batting group to answer going forward, and this West Indies tour is going to be a real challenge for Australia to see if they can answer some of those questions before we play that first test down under against England, because I think Australia have to find another opener. They have to get some assurity that Cameron Green is the answer at number 3 if they want him to be at number 3. They have to figure out where they're going to put Josh Inglis. If they're going to fit him into the lineup, where's he going to fit? So there's lots and lots of questions to be asked, and I don't think we're really going to know any answers until the end of the West Indies tour at the very, very earliest, because I think some of these are long-term questions rather than short-term fixes for Australia at this point.
Can I ask you a question, Baldy? with sort of your 2020 hindsight being such a wonderful thing, and we look back at sort of, Australia's preparation, the chopping and changing they've done through the last, two tours definitely, or the home stand, and then the tour in Sri Lanka, and then this one-off test.
Yes.
Is there anything that you would have actually done any differently going into this match?
Yeah, I think it's really easy to Monday morning quarterback in hindsight, but the thing that we really missed in this test match was impetus at the top of the innings, and Sam Constas could have given us that impetus, right? If we think that Sam Constas is the answer to our long-term question of who is Australia's best opening batter, then he should have played and he should have opened the batting in Sri Lanka. That's sort of point number one. If we think that he's the best opening batter in the country against Jasprit Bumrah, then he's good enough to be the best opening batter in the country against Kagiso Rabada. And although I said, we want the safest pair of hands of the World Test Championship final, and I would have gone with Marcus Harris at the top of the innings, actually going with Marnus Labuschagne as a one-off opening batter for this particular test match was not a great decision. And I think I made my views clear on that prior to this test match. So I'm not going to resolve from the fact that he was my least preferred option. But I think if Australia are going to answer the question and we think that Sam Constas is the answer, then we need to get him in the team and get him in there on a permanent basis. Particularly if you look at the fact that Khawaja's got at best 18 months, maybe 2 years left in his career. So we need to start establishing a senior opener for there going forward. It's very, very easy to Monday morning quarterback that Green was one or two too high at number 3, but we needed a number 3. Travis Head wasn't willing to step up. Steve Smith wasn't willing to step up. So you've got to have someone who's willing to put their hand up, and he did put his hand up, even though, he got found out. I still think he's a good batter for Australia. I just think that maybe 3 is one too high at this point in his career. He looked pretty assured against New Zealand in New Zealand at number 4. He's batted really, really comfortably, as Stu said in the preview, at number 5 and 6 in the county scene, and maybe that's his best strength, and everyone else has got to push up a little bit. So there are some real questions to be answered, but I think if Australia are going to pick and stick, as we have done for so long in the past, that we need to give someone like Sam Constas a real consistent run at the top of the order so that he gets some consistency in his game. And we find out if he's the answer, right? We find out if he is the guy who can deliver for Australia consistently, or if he's a flash in the pan that will score 100 every 10 or 12 games, but isn't going to deliver us much in between. And we don't really know the answer to that because he's only 20, 21 years old.
And boys, for South Africa, what have they got to do now to cement this? And any personnel conversations that we might have around that before we close up?
I don't really have any personnel questions. I think just quickly on Baldy's stuff. I don't think it's disaster zone for Australia. I mean, we Smith catches Bavuma in that second innings that, when he injures his finger, it's 76 for 3. We saw, the nerves. I mean, they even spoke about it, Bedingham and Stubbs. And, Verena in particular was about the most nervous man I've ever seen in my life when he was batting. He basically was trying to finish that every single ball, and then the fact that Bavuma kind of hung in there. I think the coach talked about it afterwards. Bavuma injures his hamstring. Coach is saying, it's time to, you can come off. Like, you've got an injured hamstring, you can come off. And Bavuma and Markram were like, no, we need to stay out there as long as possible, us two together, to get this, as close as we can. Because I think they knew, and everyone knew, how fragile that South African and inexperienced that South African middle order is. And I suppose that's the thing, if you want to talk about South Africa, that those guys have to now kick on. There's a lot of potential there with Stubbs, with Rickleton, with Bedingham. You can see that the talent is there. Now they have to actually sort of build this out and become, you hope that, I guess, Markram is now going to get from this innings and go, okay, like I can do this on a regular basis now. Now it's time, to show. He's been playing a long time, but he's now 30. I think he's in his he's 30 or 31, turning 31 soon, I think. So, now is the time where he should well be in his prime, like the guys that we see now scoring a lot of runs, like Root and Smith and all these guys. They're doing it well into their 30s. So you would hope that Markram can now be an anchor for them, and Bavuma can... I know he doesn't kind of get the hundreds that people want, but it was fantastic to see him sort of, he's so gritty, and you see how he leads this team and the passion that he clearly has for the South African side. So, I think it's just about building out that batting order. That we've talked about the brilliant bowling lineup they have. This next World Test Championships, people complained about the teams they played in this World Test Championship cycle. The next one is we're really going to see how much they can use this win as a springboard. They play home against Australia and England and Bangladesh, and then they're away in India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. I mean, that's a pretty tough World Test Championship cycle on paper. So we're going to now see how much they can build from that. But they've already shown in the white ball formats how well they're going and how consistent they're doing in that. So, if you're looking massive, big picture sort of decade stuff, I think we're looking at them as contenders for every ICC event going around at the moment. But yeah, this World Test Championship cycle in particular, I think if they can't solve that batting, particularly, away in the subcontinent, then it's going to be a real challenge to defend this title. But yeah, awesome to see them do it, and especially for those guys like Rabada to show up and actually, show that all of the talk about him, he's kind of the forgotten superstar because he never gets to play enough games against these big nations. To go out and do something like that on the big stage, to see what it means for all those guys, yeah, awesome. Loved it.
Yeah. My one thing for them over the course of the next wee while is the financial component. We've seen the likes of Henrik Klassen retire from international cricket now. He isn't a gun red ball player, but I think what they're going to need is they're going to need to be able to keep hold of guys that are able to play franchise cricket as well. We know that they've had some, money concerns, that South African board. That's why that CA 20 league has come in to try and boost the coffers there. So that, I think, is going to be the other thing, is there is still that gulf between England, Australia, India. And unless we see South Africa, Pakistan, West Indies, etc., able to hold on to their players for those international windows, we can't really see South Africa sending a B team away on any of those trips, like they did to New Zealand, 18 months or so ago. We can't do that because of the franchise piece as well. So they are going to need to make sure that they can pay and keep their players playing through all of that red ball cycle as well. It'd be my only addition. Raj, anything from you?
No, nothing from me. I think we have been very sort of introspective on all of these, everything we've talked about today, but I think South Africa actually have a really, really bright future ahead of them. And, when I'm going to come to sort of be choosing them in the preview, I might actually choose them. I might actually go, I think that they can win this World Cup final this year. So they've got my attention. I think that their future looks very good.
Awesome. Well, look, a big congratulations to the South African men's team. They've got their hands on the mace. It will be going on South African Airlines rather than Qantas this time around. And that's about all we've got time for on the Top Order podcast for this week. We'll see you soon. Good night.